Hey, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Six Pack Network. I'm your host, Dylan Clemons. Here with me today is Joe Bond, founder of Fantasy Six Pack, and we are continuing our training camp check-in shows where we are going around to 32 beat writers or reporters and interviewing them, discussing on what they've seen during training camp. In this episode, we're talking the Miami Dolphins, and here helping us do so is Jason Sarney, who covers the Dolphins for DolphinsTalk.com and the Dolphins Wire. Jason, I appreciate you giving us your time in such a busy part of the year. How are you doing today?
Well, I appreciate you guys having me. It's always a pleasure to talk Dolphins football. August, everyone's a contender. Everyone's 0-0 in their unbuilt fantasy team. So now it's preparation time. So it's perfect.
Absolutely. Before we jump into the interview, I just want to remind everyone, please hit that like button. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that little bell for notifications so you know when a new video drops over here. And then head on over to fantasy6pack.net/plans to become an all-access member, where you get access to our award-winning rankings, draft cheat sheets, and F6P Discord, where you can ask all your custom league questions and advice to anybody on the Fantasy Six Pack staff. And that truly is the best part. And right now, you can even save a little bit of cash by using promo code F6P NFL24 at sign up for 15% off. But enough of that stuff. Joe, how about you hit Jason here with the first question we got for him?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is a very, very interesting team for fantasy. So there's a lot of deep topics here, but we'll start with the running back position. And look, if you look at ADP for fantasy right now, it is Achane, and man, that's like he's the guy, the guy. Raheem Mostert is still there, though. Who are you seeing as the guy who's going to lead this backfield in touches, and just by how much?
It's a very intriguing question. And doing a lot of drafts and best ball, I'm seeing Achane as like a top 11 back. And people are swiping most. I'm like, this is the 8th round and he's falling here? What is this madness? Now, I know a lot of people are assuming, all right, the natural progression is going to be Achane is going to be like the workhorse. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. Mostert is kind of old school Mike McDaniel playbook kind of guy. The relationship is there. The trust is there. When you look at the distribution of touches, if health is, knock on wood, okay, I do think it's going to be relatively similar to last year where, Mostert was at 13, 14 attempts a game, Achane at 9, 10. Now, here's the little kicker here is that Achane out of the backfield as a receiver could be potent. If he was in more games last year, he would have had, obviously, a lot more target opportunities as a pass receiver, because they're using him in the slot. They're putting him in those exotic motions at times. So if he can consistently get games and consecutive games going without missing any time, he's probably going to catch 40 to 50 balls. So I think that's a reason why he could be up there, because he was heading to that number. I don't want to dethrone Mostert just yet with the age. He's almost kind of drinking from his fountain of youth. He's got a great
Pulled a little
system.
Frank Gore.
100%. It reminds me of that. Great call, Joe. But it wouldn't surprise me if the distribution kind of goes a little bit towards maybe 48-52 instead of a little bit like it was last year. So I don't expect Achane to take over, because if, let's say, Mostert's out, don't think that Achane's going to get 20 carries. Jaylen Wright is going to come in and be Raheem Mostert, and Achane's just going to be Achane. The same thing, same job. So it's going to be interesting from a football versus fantasy standpoint this year for a Miami backfield.
Yeah. No, I feel you. I have passed on Achane everywhere because he goes in like the mid to late second. But I'm trying to pick up all the Mostert shares because you're right. It's such a value. It's like this dude was like RB 2 or 3 last year. Like, come on. I know he probably won't do that again, but round 8, I'll take it.
Absolutely.
Touchdowns,
Jason,
man. He's the Dolphins touchdown record.
Right? I was actually, that's where I was just going to ask you. I was going to give you one follow-up question. Do you still see Mostert as the guy who's going to get a lot of the red zone and goal line work as the running back there? Because that's where he did a lot of his work last year.
I mean, unless, a Jaylen Wright does that job particularly well, but I do think that he's not going to replicate the record because the Dolphins have a couple of more pass receivers and catchers, not just wide receivers. They have Jonnu Smith, tight end that they brought in, who's going to factor in. We'll talk about him in a minute. They have one or two more weapons within that red zone, so they might not necessarily need to lean on Mostert that much. So to expect 18, 20 touchdowns, I'm going to have to pump the brakes. But to get a healthy dose between those two, I think they're still going to be very potent in the red zone.
Cool.
Fair enough. Looking at the quarterback position, and Tua is coming off career highs, led the NFL in with 4,600 yards passing. The first half of the season, he was absolutely fantastic, but it was the back half where he really, and the whole Dolphins offense just kind of fell off a little bit. Do you expect him to be able to build on that 4,600 yard season, or do you think that was kind of peak Tua that we saw last year? And to be honest with you, even with him throwing for 4,600 yards, he still wasn't a great fantasy asset last year.
I do think the yards will be there. I think they're going to be a little bit more balanced, redistributed, so to speak. As mentioned, they have more targets. I don't want to necessarily mention Odell Beckham Jr. just yet because he's probably going to miss the first 3-4 games of the year. But this tight end room is very interesting. And Jonnu Smith added to Durham Smythe. Smythe's not a fantasy guy. He's like a football player, blocker, kind of will do something when you need him to do it when his number's called. But what Jonnu Smith does is he creates yards after the catch, unlike any tight end that the Dolphins have seen in quite a while. So the days of the Mike Gesicki, all right, he can't do anything after he catches the ball. Where's the asset there? Jonnu Smith is a guy who's up there in this metric, average yards after catch per reception, with George Kittle. He's one of the elite in the league throughout his career. So I would expect a lot of yards to go Jonnu Smith's way. So it's great for Tua to have now a third option that's really a yak machine other than Waddle and, of course, Tyreek Hill. Now, they also bring in a rookie, Malik Washington, who I think if he develops enough, could be a slot weapon for this team. Again, adding more weapons that's not Hill and Waddle. And a sneaky guy is River Craycraft. He's not going to be a fantasy blow-up guy, but if you're absolutely desperate and like the cookie crumbles on a bye week and you want to throw him in on a daily, I think River should get some more targets this year. But Tua's yardage probably will stay very similar, if not a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. If you're a Tua owner, you're kind of hoping for a little bit of regression on more of the passing touchdowns that go up a little bit. Maybe Mostert goes from 20 touchdowns that he had last year to maybe 10, and 7 or 8 of those goes to Tua through the air. That'd be the ideal situation for that. So
absolutely. All right, jumping into receiver here.
Tight ends last year. No, sorry, I just wanted to throw it. You're absolutely right, because they're going to get more than 0 touchdowns to tight ends last year. They have 2 viable guys in Jonnu Smith and another guy. If he makes the team, Jody Fortson, he specializes in goal line touchdowns. Of his 4 touchdowns in his career in Kansas City, 3 of them were on the goal line. So sneaky play there too for a tight end.
Yeah, they just got to decide to use the tight end. I mean, it's not like Gesicki wasn't a good pass catcher. It's like that's what he was good at, and they just decided not to utilize it. So that's the interesting story there. So, but the receiver talk here. So we know Tyreek Hill is the man there, right? And we know Tyreek Hill is going to do Tyreek Hill things. Jaylen Waddle is kind of the one who everybody's going, he's good, but what happened last year, right? So a couple years ago, led the league in yards per reception. Last year it dropped. He was 33rd. Do you see them using him more and get him getting back to that 18 yards per reception, or with Tyreek now here, the around 14 range is kind of where we're gonna get with him?
He's a very interesting study because he's done so many different things as a record stuffer. He's 3 straight years of 1,000 yards. He had the rookie reception record. He's literally the only one of the grouping of receivers to have 1,000 yards to start off the season. Those 3 straight years, there's like 12 of them. He's the only one to have led the league in yards per reception in 1 year in his career. So he didn't do it last year, of course, but I think that number is going to come on up to maybe like 15 and a half because his catch rate was better last year. He dropped less passes. He put on a little bit of, bulk. He didn't have a huge touchdown year, only 4, but
Mhm.
a lot of people like to just look at the touchdowns. He did have, again, as you guys mentioned, the running backs vulturing those touchdowns. And of course, Tyreek Hill. This is a number 2 wide receiver on a football team that could very well be a number 1 receiver on 24 other teams. So
Yeah.
I really am going to be interested to see. I mean, do the math. If you take 200 yards off of Tyreek, 1 or 2 touchdowns off of Mostert, you throw him to Jaylen Waddle, and all of a sudden you bump him up a rung or 2 in tier.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I like Waddle where he's going. I do think he can bounce back a little bit this year. It's just, it's something to consider when you look at the offense as a whole and how do they utilize everybody. So,
yep, absolutely. And we already touched on the tight ends a little bit, but I wanted to give a specific question here for Jonnu Smith. With him coming over, we've seen him showing flashes in the past with Tennessee, with Atlanta last year. And I know I gave some Kyle Pitts owners nightmares when Jonnu Smith's catching the ball instead of Kyle Pitts. But anyways, Jason, what kind of role do you see from Jonnu Smith in this offense? Do you see him being the number 3 target getter behind Hill and Waddle, or is he still behind Achane and maybe 1 or 2 of those other wide receivers?
It's absolutely conceivable that in raw statistics, and believe it or not, the 3rd leading pass catcher for the Dolphins last year was Durham Smythe. And he's not a fantasy guy. He's not, It was out of the fact that 51% of the overall team targets went to 2 guys, Hill and Waddle. Smith is a guy that you're going to want to use in all areas of the field because of that yak ability. But when he gets into the red zone, that's where a lot of his touchdowns have come from. I believe in his career, 15 of them have come from the red zone, about 11 or 10 of them from inside the 10. So this is a guy that brings another component to a red zone offense that already has a couple of really good running backs, 2 very viable receivers. So who's the guy that no one's thinking of? That's number 5. But this guy can literally be the 2nd or 3rd leading touchdown scorer and receiving guy for the Dolphins, because you mentioned, those 4 guys ahead of him, running backs getting touchdowns, wide receivers getting touchdowns. I think Smith is going to get a couple of them this year.
For sure.
Yeah. Been a big target of mine later rounds if I just miss on all the tight ends or best ball, stuff like that. So I like to hear that.
Yeah,
so
terrific offense to get a piece of for sure.
Yeah. So I know we've been talking a little fantasy
basement for him.
Yeah. So I know we've been talking a little fantasy, but the questions really aren't like fantasy focused per se. But this one is, and we're asking this to everybody who covers their team, and it's who is a player that you're seeing that is going to surprise, good or bad, that fantasy managers need to know about?
That's a great question. I think if I have to really do a good surprise, I think it's going to be Jonnu Smith. Just to stick with him, because everyone is going to draft their tight ends 1 through 12, and I don't think he's going to be on that list. But I think he'll finish 10, 11, 12, which creates a good amount of value to get him as your tight end 2. And then all of a sudden, you're starting in weeks 5, 6, 7, 8, and hopefully it can get you, through the playoffs. But in a bad sense, it's hard to go bad sense with a guy like a Tyreek or a Waddle. I don't want to be on the 2,000 yard count with Hill at all. Last year, I was kind of worried about it. Like, I would much rather, like I said, 200 yards to Waddle, 100 of those yards to, a 3rd wide receiver. Let the 3rd leading pass catcher be an actual wide receiver. So that could be an Odell Beckham Jr. if he gets back. He could be my bad. I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't do much. I wouldn't be shocked if he plays 13 games and he's a stud in 7 of them. Mm-hmm. I'm staying away from Beckham Jr. unless I see proof in the pudding, and you're probably going to see that no earlier than October. So that would be my bad if I have to. Let's not go crazy on Odell Beckham Jr. on the Dolphins. He hasn't even hit the field yet.
I feel you on that one. All right, Jason, I want to thank you for coming on, man. This has been great. And before we let you go, though, I want to give you an opportunity to let everybody know where they can find you and what you got going on this season.
Oh, I appreciate this, guys. Dylan, Joe, this was an awesome time. You can find me on Dolphins Talk, Dolphins Wire, always up on Twitter doing my fun stuff, Jason_Sarney, and just really can't wait for the season to get on underway here.
Awesome stuff, man. All right, man. So again, thanks, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Thanks, Jason.
Anytime, guys. Appreciate you having me.
All right, thanks. All right, so that's it for the Dolphins training camp check-in. As we've said on all the shows, make sure you hit that subscribe button, that like button, leave those comments wherever you're watching and listening. We appreciate it. And check out the rest of these training camp check-ins. A lot of good information, man, that you're going to be able to take into your drafts that not everybody's going to have. Trust me on that one. So check out the rest of them on the playlist, and see y'all later.